Hello everyone and welcome to the episode proper for New Year's Day, and we start with the band's debut album, My Dear. Released in 2007, it would be their only album through TVT Records, and it was produced by the band themselves alongside Eugene Pereiras. So for people familiar with this band, you may not know that they started with a much more pop-punk vibe to their sound. And that is very apparent from the first song on here, titled I Was Right. So yeah, the mid-2000s pop-punk beat these guys really hard because all of the traps are here, and I really like it a lot, to be honest. It's got some really great melodies to it. Ash Costello's voice fits this style quite uniquely. It's got some solid production thanks to how the band handles it. But the album does have an issue that really isn't any fault of its own. See, the reason why this is their only album on TVT was because a year after it came out, the label went bankrupt and was bought out by American music company The Orchard. And after that happened, Adam Laubach and Mike Shulden left the band, and you know what? No, we're not here to focus on the bad shit, we're here to talk about the good shit, so let's do that. The album, despite its pop-punk sound, does have the band's darkness bubbling just barely under it, a darkness which would become the basis for what we know them better for today in their later albums. There's also the fact that members of bands like Real Big Fish and Motion City Soundtrack helped out on some songs for the album too, co-writing and even having some guest spots as well. But don't get it twisted, the album is still very much New Year's Day, from its clean production to its solid instrumentation, and from its catchy chord structure to lyrics about love, breakups, lies and self-love. My favourite song goes to My Sweet Unvalentine. My Dear is a well-crafted, catchy and very ambitious album that lays a solid groundwork for what will come after, but be aware if you are going to listen to it, it's not like the New Year's Day you know today, so just keep that in mind, but still really good. Next is the band's second album, Victim to Villain. Released in 2013, it would be their first and only album through Century Media Records, and it would be produced by Eric Ron, who I like. So, despite the, little bankruptcy of their old label thing, the band didn't really waste much time in international waters, putting out a Japanese exclusive album titled Headlines and Headstones, followed by a 2011 EP titled The Mechanical Heart. They would be picked up by Century Media not long after this, and they would put out this album 2 years after the fact. There was also several lineup shifts in the time between, and also that whole Davey Vandy thing, which I'd rather not bring up because fuck that cunt, I hate him, everyone does, he's awful. Anyway, all of that stuff happening between is presumably what led to this album being put off for so long, because it is a 6-year gap. Regardless, the album starts with the song Do Your Worst, and yes, this is the New Year's Day that we all know a bit better today. But having said that, one thing that I like is that they keep the catchy pop-punk sensibilities of their debut with almost none of the pop-punk sound. The album leans hard into its newer, darker sound with lower and heavier riffs, harsher vocals, and an overall darker tone, all in a way that doesn't feel like a total whiplash when compared to their debut. And props to Eric Ron's production chops. He's always been one of the more underrated guys going in my opinion, and he brings out a lot in the band, streamlining the sonic sound into a nice cohesive and coherent structure. The lyrics also have darker subject matter to match the tone as well, speaking about things like addiction, pain, self-doubt and hatred, and it's again complemented by how good the band sounds. My favourite song goes to Bloody Mary. Honestly, this album was worth a 6-year wait, and I'm glad that the band were able to turn their troubles leading up to the album into a good energy that really powers through the runtime, because there isn't a lot of it to go around, but there's more than enough. Next is the band's third album, Malevolence. Released in 2015, it would come out through Another Century, and it was again produced by Eric Ron. So, after Victim to Villain, the band released a 2014 EP titled Epidemic, apropos, considering the year we live in, via Grey Area Records, and then they would sign back up with Century Media, but under their imprint label titled Another Century, who they're still with today to my knowledge. We'd also start getting some of the New Year's Day lineup that we have today, which is good, and also the band were part of the 2015 Warped Tour, which is also good. Anyway, this album starts with Kill or Be Killed, which was my first New Year's Day song. As a matter of fact, actually, this was my first New Year's Day album, so yeah, it's pretty jarring to compare stuff like this to what was on their debut. It seems to be a much easier transition this time around though, and the band leaned a bit heavier into it with this one. In fact, heavier seems to be the operative word here, as a lot of the content here is darker, there's more harsh and gang vocals, and Ash even gets to scream here, something I wish she would do a lot more because damn, she is so good at it. And that shows in the instruments as well, with some nice harmony thrown in under the big rhythmic riffs, which are complemented nicely by the bass work that we get too. And the drumming is fantastic as well, staying in time, lovely fills, it just sounds really good. Okay. And the lyrics cover darker things like abuse, betrayal, hopelessness and pain, all conveyed in an honest way. So, I don't really have a lot of complaints about this album, to be honest. It's just a really good, really well put together album, and I'm mad that I wasn't as into this style back then as I am now, but I still did like this album back in 2015 when it came out. It's just, I'm more into the weird shit these days, so it works for me. My favourite song goes to Relentless. Malevolence is the album that arguably put the band on the map, and with the lyrics, performance, production and structure, it's really not difficult to hear or see why. And finally we reach the band's fourth album, Unbreakable. Released in 2019, it would again come out through Another Century, and I couldn't find a producer, so let's just say that it was Eric Ron again, and maybe the band as well, maybe. As it turns out, Malevolence wasn't just good, but it was also... Hang on, was it Malevolent or Malevolence? Yeah, okay. So yeah, as it turns out, Malevolence wasn't just good, but it was really successful. New Year's Day got to go on the 2017 Warped Tour. They toured with the bands like Bowling for Soup, CKY and In This Moment, and they performed with Lizzie Hale at the Alternative Press Music Awards in 2017. Not to mention there was more lineup changes, lots of cover songs of the 2018 EP titled Diary of a Creep. In short, the band was some proper busy bees for the 4 years in between. Anyhow, this album starts with the song Come For Me, and again, it sort of starts the same as the band's last two albums, but with a much heavier edge this time around. When Ash Costello, who, as I established earlier, is a great screamer, screams on the opening song, you know you're in for a damn good time. There's also a much different feel, and not just due to that heaviness, as there's a more electronic lean in some areas of the album, making this feel like a more gothic sort of affair. One surprising thing is that this album didn't get a great reception as it felt too similar to the last two albums, and while I do sort of agree, well, what's wrong with keeping such a great sound around? The riffs are all great here, again fitting the album's emotional dark atmosphere. The band put all that they can into it, they try new stuff, and they make a really strong sounding album, and the lyrics cover things like fear, abuse, sexuality and depression, all conveyed in an honest and really raw feeling way. My favourite song goes to Done With You. Unbreakable is sort of the same old from the band, but considering that it's a very well produced and hard hitting same old and really nice to listen to, I think I can learn to live with that. So before I do sign off, I want to say thank you to everybody who tuned in to No Love Lost 2 last night. I know there was a lot of technical difficulties and I didn't really get to do a lot of commentary because of, it wasn't mic issues, it was just network issues with my, internet being a bit wonky. But it turned out really well and only one title changed hands, which is sort of a first, I think. And, it's also the last No Love Lost that I'm going to be putting out. But don't worry, that will be sorted out soon. Anyway, that's the end of the episode proper. Did these guys make you feel unbreakable, or did they make you feel more malevolent? Either way, I will see you next time as I cover Helsinki, Finland's own Battle Beast. And as always, thank you for watching, you're awesome. Bye bye.